Paul Kelly for our regular Sunday discussion. Paul, on the climate debate, Scott Morrison, he faces this challenge. It's electoral, as you pointed out, it's political, but it's also a test of unity for him.
Oh, I think that's right, Kieran. There's no doubt now what we saw this week is that bushfires are now frontline politics. We saw this spat between the Greens and the Nationals, which advanced neither party. The Greens essentially arguing the Morrison government was responsible for the fires, which was an irrational and outrageous claim, and the Nationals in response being completely over the top and quite discredited. Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese did the right thing, being prudent in terms of the politics. But I think two big things will happen down the track. First of all, after things settle down, I think the Morrison government will coordinate efforts to look at the on-the-ground firefighting effort in terms of land management, resources, volunteer firefighting brigades and backburning. And then there's the big issue of climate change, and that will change a lot during the course of this coming term. And what Scott Morrison will need to do is to balance his competing constituencies here, those people in the cities who are committed to action on climate change, and many people in the regions who are more apprehensive and want a more modest approach.
Morrison, do you think he's got a chance to finally resolve this conundrum, Paul? Because he's not an ideological warrior on this matter one way or the other.
He's not ideological, that's right. He's very practical, he's down to earth. Look, I don't think we're going to see any great resolution of the issue because I think what's actually happening is that opinion is becoming polarised. What we're seeing this week is that obviously climate change is not responsible for the fires, but the climate is changing and more people recognise that, and the changing climate does contribute to the intensity of the fires and the duration of the fire season. So there's a growing awareness that climate change is a problem and needs to be addressed. When it comes to the question of what you do, well, that's a separate matter altogether. And I think here there's a very, very sharp division of opinion. While certain people want more radical action, the fact of the matter, and I think it was highlighted this week, is that if Australia closes a coal mine or increases emissions, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever to global warming in the atmosphere, which is an international issue. That's not to say we shouldn't act. We should act. We should have a proportionate response to what is a serious and global problem. But I think as far as Scott Morrison is concerned, it's going to be a matter of compromise politics, getting the balance right over the next 3 years as this issue becomes more and more important and, frankly, more difficult for him to manage.
Speaking of opinions being entrenched, what about the Chinese reaction? The statement issued after blocking Hastie and Patterson in their visit. They're calling for repentance, they're calling for redress from those two individuals.
This statement is beyond satire. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's the action of, it's the voice of a bullying totalitarian government that is insecure and paranoid, that likes to intimidate other people but can't take it when it gets a bit of criticism itself. I mean, this is just extraordinary. Banning these two Liberal politicians from visiting China, it's not going to help China. It's not going to change their mind. And Stephen Jones was completely correct in the comments he made that we should be promoting interaction, particularly between our politicians. And if these hard-line politicians, when it comes to China and have the chance to go to China, well, there's nothing for Beijing to fear in that, and maybe something for Beijing to gain. But there's nothing for it to gain whatsoever, banning them and creating the impression that from now on, the only Australian politicians allowed to go to China will be those who pass this absurd test about repentance and redress.
Finally, just a quick one on the economy. What's your view on where there might be a potential shot in the arm for the economy right now?
Well, I think the government will still be careful and cautious, but pressure is building up. There's no doubt about that, Kieran. The economy is soft, and the increase in the unemployment rate to 5.3% raises the great fear that it might go up further to 5.4 or 5.5. Now, the Morrison government has lived and won the election on job creation. It can't tolerate any increase in the unemployment rate. It will have to act if that starts to happen. I think the government will still assess things. We've got the mid-year review coming up, but I think the pressure is building for more government initiatives and more measures. There's no doubt about that at all. And the government, again, is going to have to get the balance right here. It won't sacrifice the surplus, and I might point out that the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has made it clear that Labor doesn't want to sacrifice the surplus either. So the sort of stimulus we're talking about is going to be a modest one.